I've enjoyed every minute.
Sorry to disturb you. We are not able to see her face, and communication is not possible in face-to-face.
You can't hear my voice?
Face is not. Should we stand up?
I'm sorry, I wanted to be a little bit lower so I could see what I was doing on the screen, because there's a bit going on in this. Before I begin, I would first of all like to say it is the end of a very intense conference. It has been really exhausting for some of us, I think, and I hope you'll allow me to indulge in a little bit of light entertainment as I go through my presentation with you. But also, I would like to, before I begin, thank just one or two people. I would like to thank so many people personally, but I would like to thank Professor Sahej, Nalina Singh and Professor Shefali Bakshi very much indeed for inviting me to be here, for all of the organisation that they have done and put into this, and particularly to my two student buddies. It's been a really wonderful success. So thank you all of the student buddies, and particularly my student buddies. And I would like to dedicate this presentation to my student buddies, and particularly some of the slides to Dipali, because I understand she has a passion for cooking. So, to begin with, communication. Putting language together is a bit like putting cooking together. It's a bit like cooking. There are so many different recipes out there, each with its own ingredients, each with its own way of putting things together, each having a really interesting outcome. So take ratatouille, for instance. I went onto the web and I found quite a lot of interesting recipes for ratatouille. They all have a really interesting outcome, but they all have differences in their ingredients. So here are three of them. They all have tomatoes, courgettes. In the case of courgettes, sometimes they're called zucchini. In the case of aubergine, we in Britain call them eggplant. They have onions. Sometimes they're specifically chopped and diced. In other cases, you have varieties of peppers, different proportions of olive oil, different amounts of parsley and herbs and other things. And then the taste, the flavour, is also a little different. It's quite interesting in these recipes that one of them uses sugar and red wine vinegar, where another one uses grated Parmesan cheese. Language is a bit like this, and particularly English. If you look at English, it isn't just English. We've been invaded over the centuries by so many different people, and our language is made up of Latin and Greek and French and the Germanic languages. We have Old Norse and we have Old Dutch. And these days, an additional 6% of English is made up from other languages as well. Added to this, we have the complication of Raj Kachru's three circles of English. We heard about this yesterday. We have the inner circle, which is sort of the domain of the UK, the USA, Australia, and so on. And then the outer circle, where India, Nigeria, and the Philippines sit. And increasingly, we have speakers of English in the expanding circle. And just to give you a few statistics, the Encyclopedia Britannica says that for the moment, and I'm sure this is increasing by the minute as we speak, that 400 million people speak English as their first language, another 400 to 500 million speak it as their second language, and about another billion people speak it worldwide, at least a little bit. In the UK, from north to south, there are variations in English. We have different dialects being used across the country. When I was a child, these dialects might vary within a 20-mile radius. That's reducing now, or rather it's expanding now as we all speak a little bit more similarly. But for example, in Yorkshire, what we have is an archaic form, We have an archaic form of a second person singular pronoun, thou. So, for example, quite commonly in Yorkshire, people will say, "Thou's got nowt on me," or "Thou's being right mardy." And this is very commonly used in Yorkshire. In Newcastle, where the Geordies live, here they have an old form of English which has been retained to the present day. This old English form of the verb to go is gan. So if you go to Newcastle, you might hear people say, "Are you ganning the match?" And this is very commonly used. But while these different forms of English are used in different parts of the country, in speech, and they may be used in local radio programs, they're rarely heard on serious programs such as the news. TV presenters of the news and of serious programs will refrain from using colloquial or dialectic speech. And even presenters of information chat shows will also refrain from using local dialects. They may have accents, they may have a Yorkshire or a Scottish or an Essex accent, but they will be using standard English. Then we have the concept as English as a lingua franca. There's a body of research that's looking into English as a lingua franca. And it's commonly used around the world. So, for example, you have a German speaker from Munich. I think we're getting feedback. Thank you. You get a German from Munich speaking English, perhaps to a Brazilian student speaking English, and they will accommodate for each other's lack of understanding. They will find a way round the lack of understanding, and this use of English is termed English as a lingua franca. This particular body of researchers has also suggested that we, I'm speaking as a representative from an examination board, should take this seriously. It is something that's happening, and we should be testing ELT. However, ELT is even more dynamic than English. The language that's used by the German from Munich will be different from the language used by the German from Stuttgart, which will be different from the Brazilian, and so on. And these combinations of different types of ELT will be so very different that it's impossible to test. And they will dynamically change all the time. So while I think it's very important to raise it as an awareness with your students and make them aware that they may have to accommodate their language to speak to somebody from another country who's speaking English, it is difficult to test. So what's the situation in India? Well, in India, I find that Indian English is really a little bit more formal than we would use in the UK. So, for example, yesterday I was asked, what is my good name? In the UK, I would have been asked, what is my name? And I would say, Angela Ffrench. And my good name would have been obvious in my response. But this is common use in India, as is the very creative use of language as well. There's lovely creative use in official letters of please do the needful, or I will revert back, or you will be intimated shortly. So we've seen there are many differences. Does it matter? This is what you have to ask yourselves. Does it matter? The Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary has an inclusive approach to language. And Alison Waters, the publishing manager, says that they have introduced entries from different strains of World English into their dictionaries to represent this inclusive approach. By taking words such as Indian English and labeling it as Indian English, this clarifies when usage does not extend widely into other varieties of English. So what we have is clear labelling, and a variety of words that have been introduced to show the rest of the world that we do have Indian English. It exists and it is being used. And it encompasses such words that are derived from Hindi and other languages, such as I, Babu, Dacoit, Lak, and so on. We also have other uses that are different from those that we would be using in the UK. I particularly like encounter, your use of encounter, an incident in which police shoot dead a suspected criminal. The two gangsters were later killed in a police encounter. Sounds really quite exciting. It's not the way that we would use it, but it's nice and creative. Before I go on, I'm just going to have a little interview, and I'd like to introduce you to two of my friends. Hello. Myself, my name is Eli Ffrench. Hello, I'm Walter Wolf. It's good to see you. I wasn't expecting to see you today. I am waiting for bus since 1 hour. Bus? Who is Bus? Is he a colleague? No, Bus. Bus to Chennai. Oh, sorry. You had to wait an hour for the bus. I thought you lived nearby. My home is only walkable distance from office. But this morning I am with my mother. My mother tells when I get up in the morning, I will have a hot cup of coffee. This is must and should for me. Today I was too hungry. Too hungry for what? I am hungry. I ate off 5 bananas. You used banana leaves as plates. You had 5 dishes. No, 5 bananas. Ah, sorry. Why did you come in today? I am needing something urgent. You need something urgently. You should have called. Yes, last to last I am doing the telephonic conversation, but I am having no luck. The phone is ringing, ringing, ringing. No one is lifting. Lifting what? The phone. No one is lifting. Ah, you mean no one answered? Yes, Arun told I had sent the check yesterday. You sent a check? What for? The current bill. The current bill for what? The current! You mean dried fruit? No, current, power. Ah, you mean the electricity bill. Yes. I spoke to Arun yesterday. Did you met him? What's he told? He told me a bit about you. You're a student, aren't you, and you like music? Yes, in my free time I am listening to music. But I am not a student anymore. I am doing a job. I am doing medical transcription. Oh, that's interesting. I had read the medicinal value of garlic long back. There is many information about garlic. Even till today, I used to take garlic regularly without fail. Yes, I can tell. You seem to use garlic in India more than you do in Britain. Is that where you are coming from? You must give me your coordinates. Well, Cambridge is 52 degrees north and 0.13 degrees east, though I'm not sure how knowing that helps. I am thinking of studying abroad. Really? But we are all having problems. One person, one problem. My father got retired 2 years back. Oh, was he not ready to retire? Was he made redundant? No, he's happy to retire. Now he has a less income. Smaller. Oh dear, I am doing the same mistake often and often. But I am a good person. I am not that kind of a person who in your front will talk nice words and at your backside do all rubbish things. I'm not sure my backside should come into this. Yes, my teacher is going on telling the same things. She tells unless I do not work hard, I will not get good marks. It's the first time I've heard of not having to work hard to get good marks. I'm very late. After I go home, my wife is going to give me nicely. She has something nice for you. It's a surprise. I like surprises. No, she is boxing my ears. Can I give you a lift? That would be nice. You are needing a landmark. There is a park opposite to my house. Is that the one with the fairground rides? Do you go there often? No, I am not having time for these nonsense things. Indian English, let me tell you about the British. There was a survey a few years ago from the BBC News magazine, and the BBC asked its readers to send in their pet hates, their pet gripes, what things really irritated them most. And these are in no particular order of annoyance, but you'll recognise some. This confusion with of and have, and more commonly British people are heard to say, I could have learned how to write proper. So there's confusion as well with adjectives and adverbs. And they misuse for free when they mean for nothing, as is lend and borrow. And then there's another interesting one which is used very often by people who think that they're being a little bit more polite. She said some very nice things about George and I, and it should be George and me. And then they confuse yourself with myself, when they should actually be using just you or me. And one of the things that annoys people particularly is the misspelling of there, and there, and two, and two. So we do have problems in the UK. Let me give you one to think about. None of them is, none of them are. What do you think? Can I have a show of hands? Who would say none of them is? Who would say none of them are? Many of you would sit on the fence. Or maybe you would use both. Well, interestingly, the BBC would say none of them is. But Fowler's Modern English Usage says that none is not short for not one, and although using a singular verb is more common, using a plural verb has also been an acceptable option since the reign of King Alfred. And he was born 1,164 years ago. Let me give you something else to do. Spot the errors. How many can you see? Are you counting? Has anybody managed to find 7? Some of you have found 7. Anybody found more than 7? There are more than 7. Let's have a look at them. Is the red showing up clearly enough? So we have spelling errors. We have apostrophe errors. I feel bad that fewer and fewer students seem to understand the basic principles of good writing. And then we move into the area of confusion, where we are confusing singular and plural. For example, a student often thinks, but is this use of they the politically correct one, because we can't say he anymore, so you have to say he/she. So maybe that's okay. But then we have this their errors and your they. Identifying the errors is not the only thing. It's also useful to have a more coherent approach to a text. And this is just a quick view of a possible rewrite to make that particular piece of text a little bit more coherent. I'm going to give you 2 points of view. The first is the academic view. So what we have here is a view from Connie Edling, who is a professor of English at the University of North And she feels that these days, students are better at writing than they were 30 years ago. She said they may make mistakes. They may make an error with pronouns. They may say, Michael and me rented a car, or between you and I. But actually, because they're no longer drilled in grammar, and they are focusing on other aspects of writing, they are proving to produce better pieces of writing. Her take on this question, does it matter, is that if clarity of communication is the aim, most prescriptive rules of usage don't really cause misunderstanding. So that's one view from one academic. What about the corporate view? In the corporate world, there's a very different view. And what we have here is people who are sharing an opinion about the impact of poor language. And Sue Schallenberger, who writes for the Wall Street Journal, she suggests that managers are fighting an epidemic of grammar gaps in the workplace, and she attributes this to the informality of email, texting, and Twitter. And she feels that the looseness with language can create bad impressions with clients, ruin marketing materials, and cause communication errors. So you have to decide which way you're going. Is it important to communicate at all costs, even with error, or focus on getting things right? Even in the UK, young people need to be aware of what is appropriate in different situations. It may be appropriate for them to have a street style of talk with their peers, but if they are attending an interview or producing a covering letter for an application for a job, they must be aware of the tone and quality of the language that's required. And it's not just people in my generation who think this, because there's a young chap in America, a very successful CEO of an online company called iFixit Online. You can see that it's not my generation. And he doesn't buy the academic defense of the dynamic language. He does acknowledge that language is changing, but he feels that people who pay attention to grammar rules will also pay attention to other things. He says, or are they just sitting on the fence? This issue of communication also goes across into other things. So not just language, but also symbols. And we have 3 examples here of how important it is to be aware of cross-cultural differences. So I'm sure that you're familiar with the symbols on the left of the screen. This is the international symbol for fragile. But this symbol was misunderstood by some people at an African port. When they saw this symbol, they assumed that the goods on the ship, the boxes, contained broken glass. So to save space, they threw them overboard. In the second example, you can see 4 golf balls. There was an American company that produced golf balls for sale in the Japanese market. And they thought it would be a good idea to package them in sets of 4. It was a nice, neat, easy packaging number. What they hadn't thought about was the word for in Japanese very closely resembles death. So this product just didn't take off. And finally, another story from Japan, where a Japanese manager was having to give feedback to an American subordinate. And in Japan, it's a very high context language, and Japanese feel very uncomfortable about giving direct feedback. So it took this Japanese manager 5 attempts to be able to give the feedback to his subordinate. There's a really nice link on the website under instruct.westvalley.edu, And on this site you can get all sorts of examples of poor English. It's a fun site to go onto. And they have on the site something called buzzwords. These buzzwords are really fantastic for marketing people. They're used by people who want to impress at every opportunity. But the problem with buzzwords is they sound impressive, but actually, mostly, the way they're used today, they convey no precise meaning. And this makes them particularly useful, for example, for business, for the military management, politics, and sadly, for education administration. So beware of buzzwords, because with buzzwords, if you put them into random combinations, you get all sorts of gobbledygook, all sorts of nonsense. Just have a look. What on earth does maximise systems of strategic environmental processes mean? What does empowering your interactive competency team process mean? It's just buzzwords that mean nothing. Have they communicated a message to you? For those of you who came to my workshop, I'm sorry to go over this again, but we have at Cambridge 4 areas that we're looking at to show that a candidate has provided us with a piece of coherent, communicative language in writing. And with these 4 areas we look at are content, communicative achievement, organisation, and language. With content, we're looking at how well the candidate has fulfilled the task. In other words, have they done what they were asked to do? In communicative achievement, we want to know if they've used the right tone and the right register and had the right effect on the target reader. We want to look at how well organised their text is, whether it's been logically ordered, and how well put together it is. And finally, we look at language. Because we believe at Cambridge that a piece of writing, and a piece of speech for that matter, contains all of these elements to make it clear, engaging, coherent, and therefore communicative. So with that in mind, let's return to the kitchen. A good recipe contains ingredients. Getting those wrong, for example, putting salt instead of sugar, or adding the occasional 0 to measures, would end in disaster. Detail is vital. But ingredients aren't everything. You also need to know how to put them together, how to combine them to make a mouth-watering dish. So for proper communication, you need to get the elements of language together and combine it in a particular way. Before I finish, there's just a little footnote. You may have noticed the title on the very first slide, you may not, but the title on the very first slide was Communication is Key. In your programs, you'll see that the title is Communication is the Key. Is there a difference between the two? I wondered if I submitted Communication is Key, and I wondered if the proofreaders had thought perhaps the article was missing and the article should be put in. As it happens, it's not a problem, because either title fits this particular presentation. Communication is key means communication is fundamental. Communication is absolutely essential. But also, with success, communication can be the key.